When we think about charitable giving or even just taxation today, it's usually this incredibly sterile experience. Like you might set up an auto draft from your checking account on your phone, and you never even see the money actually leave.
Right, yeah. Or maybe it's just dropping a crisp $20 bill into, one of those velvet-lined collection plates that just gets passed quietly down the aisle.
Exactly. It's clean. It's invisible, basically.
It really is. It's just entirely detached from our physical labor. I mean, we've reduced our economic contributions to just digital numbers shifting around on a screen. You never actually touch or, smell the resources you're giving away.
Yeah, which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
But welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive, everyone.
Right.
Because today, we are pulling you out of that sterile modern mindset and dropping you straight into the ancient Near East.
Getting our hands dirty.
Literally. Specifically, we are looking at an incredibly detailed source document titled The Biblical System of Tithing. And our mission for you today is to completely dismantle the assumption that ancient tithing was just like an early rustic version of putting money in a collection plate.
Oh, it was so much more than that.
Right. We are going to reconstruct this ancient practice as a dynamic land-based 3-year agricultural cycle, one that involves loud community feasts, this totally ingenious local welfare network, and some fiercely strict mathematical rules. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and to truly grasp the architecture of the system, we really have to start by throwing out our modern definitions of wealth and income entirely. We're looking strictly at the Mosaic Covenant here.
Okay, so a totally different framework.
Exactly. The word tithe, it literally translates to a tenth. But in this specific biblical context, it was not, it wasn't a general donation from your overall net worth, nor was it a universal income tax on whatever profession you just happen to have.
Wait, really? So it's not an income tax?
No, not at all. It was a strict covenantal obligation under the law, and it was tethered exclusively to the land of Israel.
Let me stop you right there, because that feels like a massive loophole. Well, if it's tied strictly to the land, what if I don't own any? What if I'm like a highly successful merchant living in an ancient city, and I'm making an absolute fortune selling imported pottery? Am I just off the hook for this 10%?
I mean, under this specific agricultural tithe system, yes, you are.
Wow.
Your obligation on that argent income was zero. If you owned no land, you owed no agricultural tithe. If you had no animals, you owed no livestock tithe.
How is that fair at all? The wealthiest guy in town might be paying absolutely nothing, while the guy working the dirt is, footing the entire bill for the national religious system.
It does sound crazy to us, but it forces us to understand how an ancient agrarian society viewed wealth, right? In this covenant, the land itself was considered the ultimate inheritance provided by God.
Oh, I see. So the dirt is the asset.
Right. The merchant's wealth was seen as fluid and human-made, but the land's produce, like the grain, the oil, the fruit, the multiplication of the flocks, that was viewed as direct divine provision. The tithe was a return on the land's output.
Okay, so it wasn't a tax on your total net worth at all. And the source points out it was based entirely on your yearly increase, right?
Precisely. It is all about the new growth. And because the law is so mathematically rigid about it being exactly 1/10, we run into some really fascinating socioeconomic edge cases here.
Oh, I love a good edge case. Like what?
Well, think about a struggling farmer whose herd increases by only 9 animals that year. The tithe on an increase of 9 is exactly 0.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand the math here. If my neighbor's herd goes up by 9 animals, he pays nothing. But if my herd goes up by 10 animals, I owe 1.
Oh.
I'm getting taxed just for crossing that completely arbitrary threshold.
Yes.
That feels like a super steep cliff.
It is a steep cliff, but look at the function it serves, right? It naturally protects the smallest, most vulnerable margins.
Oh, because if you're small, you just don't pay.
Exactly. If you are barely scraping by with a minuscule increase, the system just does not extract from you. You slide right under the radar. But if your herd increases by 109 animals, you owe exactly 10. You don't round up to 11, you don't round down to 9.
It's fiercely literal. And the mechanics of how they actually counted this out for livestock, the source describes this process of animals sequentially passing under a rod.
Yes, passing under the rod.
Which is wild. I'm picturing like an unfeeling factory assembly line, or maybe a random baggage shack at an airport.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. The book of Leviticus explicitly states the animal is taken whether it is good or bad. So you basically funnel your new animals through a narrow gate, or under a shepherd's rod, and you just count.
Like 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, exactly. 1, 2, 3, and whoever happens to be number 10 is marked. It is set apart.
You literally watch your 10th cow walk under the rod and just know that one is spoken for. I imagine that completely bypasses human psychology. Because you don't get to stand in your field, look at your flock, and say, I think I'll give God this scrawny little runt over here, and I'll keep the prize bull for myself.
Right. It removes human greed from the equation entirely. It's sequential and it's blind. Now, for agricultural produce like the grain and the fruit, there's a slight workaround, but it was heavily, heavily disincentivized.
A workaround.
Yeah. If a landowner really wanted to keep a specific portion of their crop, they could what's called redeem it. Basically, they could buy it back with money.
But the source says they had to add a 20% penalty on top of its value. I mean, why would anyone pay 120% for their own wheat?
Well, perhaps a specific crop yielded an exceptionally high-quality harvest that they wanted to use for seed the next year, or, maybe there was a sentimental value attached to a particular vineyard. They had the option.
Right, so if you really want it, you can buy it.
Yeah, but that 20% penalty tells us the underlying goal of the system. It vastly preferred that the physical food and resources kept moving through the community. It actively discouraged hoarding.
Okay, so we've got this unyielding counting mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Every 10th animal that passes under the rod, 10% of the crop increase. But there is a massive mathematical speed bump we need to address here.
The firstborns.
Yes, we're counting 1 through 10. What happens to the very first animal born? Because from a modern perspective, we tend to just lump all religious giving into one big bucket, like it all just goes to the church or the temple.
And that is exactly where the modern perspective completely misreads the ancient text. The ancient system was highly categorized, and we really have to draw a hard, impenetrable line between firstfruits, firstborns, and the tithe. They are absolutely not the same thing.
Okay, so let me play the confused farmer here. Say I have a cow, and it gives birth to its very first calf. Firstfruits, which is the first portion of the harvest, and firstborns, the entire first animal that opens the womb, those go directly to the priests.
Yes. According to Numbers chapter 18, the firstborn animals already belong to the Lord. They are consecrated immediately.
Okay.
Furthermore, if it's a clean animal like a sheep or a cow, it cannot be redeemed. You cannot buy it back with that 20% penalty we just discussed. The entire animal goes straight to the priests.
Okay, here's my confusion then. If my cow has its first calf, and that calf goes to the priests, does that count as animal number 1 for my 10% tithe calculation?
I see what you're asking.
Yeah, because if so, I'm well on my way to paying my tax. 1 down, 9 to go.
No, it doesn't count at all. And understanding why is crucial here. You cannot tithe what you do not legally own.
Oh.
Because the firstborn already belongs entirely to God, it is completely excluded from the tithe system.
Oh, so the tithe is only calculated on the remainder.
Exactly. The ancient system layered these obligations very deliberately. Firstborns were the ultimate priority. They established that worship came before personal profit. And the tithe was a separate calculation entirely, run only on the increase that was left over after the firstborn was already removed.
Okay, let's run a hypothetical so you listening can really see how this works. Say I have 11 calves born this year. Calf number 1 is the firstborn. It goes directly to the priests. I don't own it anymore.
Right.
So I now have an increase of 10 calves remaining. I run those 10 under the rod. Number 10 is my tithe.
You've got it. It is a two-step process. Firstborns are the entire animal given to the priests, and then the tithe is 10% of the remaining increase, which is given to the Levites.
Man, that makes perfect legal sense, even if it makes the math a bit more painful for the farmer.
It's definitely a bit more painful.
Right. Now, with the grain harvested and the livestock sorted, we need to follow this massive accumulation of resources off the farm. Like, where does it actually go? Because it doesn't just sit in a silo somewhere.
No, it doesn't. And to understand where it goes, we have to look at the Deuteronomic 3-year cycle. But before we track year 1, we really must address a very common misconception that our sources specifically debunk.
Right. The 30% thing.
Yes, it's called the 30% myth.
Yeah, I've heard this from people trying to analyze biblical economics. They look at the different descriptions of the tithe in Deuteronomy and Numbers, and they assume there were 3 completely separate 10% taxes levied every single year. Like a Levitical tithe, a festival tithe, a welfare tithe, all stacking up to a 30% flat tax on an agrarian farmer.
which would have been economically devastating.
Yeah, 30% is huge.
Taking 30% of gross agricultural yield in an ancient society where margins for starvation were razor thin, I mean, it would just crush the populace.
Right.
The much stronger biblical view, and really the clearest way to harmonize the texts, is that there was only one 10% tithe. The genius of the system wasn't in extracting more wealth. It was that the usage of that single 10% rotated on a 3-year cycle.
Okay, let's walk through that rotation then. Year 1. The harvest is in. The source says this tithe is brought to the central sanctuary, which eventually becomes Jerusalem.
Yeah, the text from Deuteronomy instructs the people to bring the tithe to, quote, the place which the Lord chooses, which requires a physical pilgrimage.
But just think about the logistics of that for a second. If I live 50 or 100 miles away in northern Galilee, I cannot physically drag a tenth of my wheat harvest and a dozen uncooperative sheep across mountainous, arid terrain. I mean, the resources would spoil or die on the journey.
The law actually accounted for practical logistics, believe it or not.
Really?
Yes. If the travel distance was too great to physically haul the produce, the farmer was legally permitted to convert the physical tithe into money right in their hometown.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so they would travel lightly to Jerusalem with the currency, and once they arrived at the sanctuary, they would use that money to repurchase food, wine, or whatever their heart desired.
Wait. I'm taking my mandatory tax, and I'm buying wine and food for myself.
You are buying it for a sacred celebration.
Are you serious?
The text emphasizes that you are to eat it there in the presence of the Lord, rejoicing with your household and the Levites in your towns.
I am amazed by this. You don't just hand this tithe over to some faceless treasury official and walk away feeling poorer. You actually eat it.
You eat it, yeah.
It was a massive, shared, joyful feast in Jerusalem with your family, your servants, and the local religious workers. It's almost like a mandated, all-expenses-paid family vacation fund, but designed entirely around worshiping God and enjoying the fruits of your labor.
It completely reframes the entire concept of taxation. I mean, the tithe wasn't merely surrendered, it was participated in.
Wow.
It built national unity, too, because tribes from all over Israel were converging on one city to feast together, acknowledging that their prosperity came from the exact same source.
And year 2 operates exactly the same way, correct?
Yes. Year 2 follows the same exact pattern. The tithe is brought to Jerusalem, and the centralized celebratory worship continues.
Okay. 2 years of eating a giant sacred feast in the capital sounds like an incredible national bonding experience. But there is a glaring blind spot here, I think.
That's bad.
If I'm a farmer, I'm feasting. But what about the people back in my hometown who didn't inherit land? The orphans, the widows, the foreigners. We already established that if you don't have land, you don't owe the tithe.
Right.
But that also means you don't have the resources to throw a massive feast in Jerusalem. So how did the system prevent the vulnerable from starving while everyone else was on a holy vacation?
That exact vulnerability is what year 3 is engineered to solve.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In the 3rd year, the location and the fundamental purpose of the tithe completely shift. It is no longer taken to Jerusalem for a national festival. Instead, it is stored locally, right there within the gates of the farmer's own town.
So the food stays in the community?
Yeah.
And the beneficiaries change entirely, don't they?
Drastically. The source states that in year 3, it becomes a localized social provision explicitly for the Levites, the foreigners, the orphans, and the widows.
Okay, just to be absolutely clear, because I can hear the modern taxpayer panicking right now, I am not paying 10% for the Jerusalem feast and another 10% for the local welfare program in year 3.
No, absolutely not. We look at the specific phrasing in Deuteronomy. It says, all the tithe of your produce in that year. This proves it is not a new or secondary tax.
Okay.
It is the exact same 10% tithe, but instead of funding a pilgrimage, the entire allocation is redirected into a community welfare system. And then, after year 3, the cycle simply resets. Years 1 and 2 in Jerusalem, year 3 in your hometown.
When you step back and look at that 3-year cycle, it is just a brilliant piece of social engineering.
It really balances 2 vital needs of any society. During years 1 and 2, it funds centralized worship, national identity, and cultural unity. But it recognizes that centralization often ignores the margins. So year 3 violently decentralizes the wealth, ensuring that resources don't just pool at the top, but actively circulate to the most vulnerable members of the local community.
Now, having seen how this wealth moves around, we definitely need to address a group of people we keep mentioning. The Levites.
Yes.
They are at the feasts in years 1 and 2. and they are explicitly listed as receiving the stored grain in year 3. Why are they so heavily dependent on this system?
Well, to understand the Levites, we have to look at Numbers chapter 18. The Levites were the Israelite tribe entirely dedicated to serving in the tabernacle and then later the temple. They managed the religious center of the nation.
Right.
But their dedication came with a severe economic restriction. Unlike the other 11 tribes, they received no land inheritance when Israel settled in Canaan.
And as we've established, in an agrarian economy, no land means no crops. And no crops means no survival.
Precisely. Because they were legally barred from owning the means of agricultural production, the tithe essentially became their inheritance. They received the 10% as direct compensation for their service and their landlessness.
But this raises kind of a mechanical question for me. If the Levites are receiving 10% of the entire nation's agricultural output, are they just like a bureaucratic class sitting at the end of the line absorbing all this wealth?
Not at all. The system actually had another layer, often called the tithe of the tithe.
The tithe of the tithe.
Yes, the Levites didn't just receive, they were also legally required to give. They took 10% of the massive tithe they received from the nation, and they passed it upward to the priests.
Wait, I thought the Levites were the priests.
It's an important distinction, actually. All priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests.
Oh, I see.
The priests were a specialized elite subgroup within the tribe of Levi, specifically the high priestly Aaronic line. They were the ones who actually handled the altar, the blood, and the core sacrifices. The broader tribe of Levites handled the logistics, the music, the maintenance, and the guarding of the sanctuary.
Okay, so it operates like an incredibly advanced supply chain model. You have the farmers generating the raw agricultural increase from the land. 10% of that massive volume flows to the Levites, who manage the broader infrastructure and logistics of the nation's religion.
Right.
Then 10% of that flows up to the high priests, performing the most sacred duties. The entire religious ecosystem is supported, step by step, by the dirt and the rain.
It is an elegant, integrated supply chain, but it was entirely dependent on an invisible honor code. It relied on covenantal obedience and worship, which is why the source heavily contrasts this holy system with what happened later in Israel's history, specifically bringing up 1 Samuel chapter 8.
Ah, this is where human power structures enter the chat. The king's tithe.
Yes. For centuries, Israel operated without a centralized human king. But when they eventually demanded a monarchy to be like all the surrounding nations, the prophet Samuel issued a stark warning.
He wasn't happy about it.
Not at all. He told them exactly what a human king would do. He said he would take a tenth, a tithe, of their grain, their vineyards, and their flocks.
But, I mean, isn't a 10% tax just a 10% tax?
Yeah.
Why is Samuel warning them about something they are already doing for God?
Because the nature of the extraction fundamentally changes. When God mandates the tithe, as we've seen, it feeds the widow, it supports the landless, and it funds a joyful national feast where the taxpayer actually gets to eat the food.
Right, you're buying wine with it.
Exactly. When the human king takes 10%, it is purely political taxation. Samuel warns that the king will use it to fund his standing army, to pay his courtiers, and to build a royal administration.
The contrast is jarring when you put it like that. The biblical tithe is a community-binding mechanism of worship. The king's tithe is just the extraction of wealth to build a military-industrial complex.
It marks the transition from a system designed for the welfare of the community to a system designed for the maintenance of state power.
Wow. We have covered an immense landscape today, moving from the microscopic math of the flocks all the way to the macroeconomic shifts of a nation. Let's look back at the ground we've covered.
It's a lot.
It is. We started with a velvet collection plate and dismantled it. We found that the biblical tithe was an intensely physical, land-based obligation tied specifically to the agricultural increase of Israel. We saw the unyielding math of the rod where human manipulation was removed and exactly 10% was marked, but only after the firstborns were already given over to God.
The remainder.
Right, the remainder. Then we busted the 30% myth, replacing a crushing tax burden with an ingenious 3-year rotation. 2 years of traveling to Jerusalem to literally eat your own offering at a joyful feast, followed by a 3rd year where that exact same wealth was kept in your hometown to feed the most vulnerable people in your zip code.
Yeah.
And finally, we saw how this flow of resources supported a landless class of Levites and contrasted sharply with the later forceful extractions of human kings.
What this deep dive reveals is really the sheer sophistication of ancient economic systems. We tend to view antiquity as primitive, but this was a highly integrated, deeply intentional structure.
Absolutely.
It was specifically engineered to prevent systemic generational poverty. It supported those without land, and it ensured that the worship of God remained intrinsically physically linked to the joy of community and the care of the vulnerable.
It forces you to rethink how an economy can be structured around care, rather than just, accumulation.
And that actually leads to a final thought I want to leave you with. As we've explored, the biblical tithe was profoundly tactile. You literally felt the wool of your 10th sheep as it walked under the rod. You physically packed up heavy sacks of grain, and in year 3, you physically opened your local storehouse to hand that grain to the widow who lived down your street.
You're doing the work.
You saw her face. You saw the Levite eat the food you grew. It was real, physical wealth changing hands in plain sight. It makes you wonder. In our modern, hyper-digitized world where wealth is invisible and charity is often just an auto draft from a bank account that we never even think about, have we gained immense efficiency but lost the profound community-binding power of actually seeing, touching, and eating alongside the people our resources support?
Man, maybe that velvet collection plate we talked about at the beginning is clean and quiet. But maybe in sanitizing the process, we lost a little bit of the joy that comes with the mud, the logistics, and the chaos of a shared feast. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the biblical system of tithing. We hope it completely changed how you view this ancient practice.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep digging and keep asking great questions.